There are two kinds of silence in my neighborhood. There's the peaceful, Sunday morning kind, the one filled with the gentle hum of lawn mowers and the distant laughter of kids on bikes. Then there's the other kind, the judgmental kind. The silence that watches you, heavy and thick, from behind perfectly clean bay windows. For the first 2 years I lived on Maple Drive, I mostly enjoyed the former. Then Carol moved in across the street, and the silence started to feel like a pair of eyes boring into the back of my neck. My sanctuary, my escape from a world of error messages and rebooting servers, was my garage, and inside it, my life's work, the Stallion. She was a 1969 Ford Mustang Mach 1, a half-restored hunk of American steel and questionable wiring that my dad left me. He'd bought her brand new, driven her to his wedding, and brought me home from the hospital in her. Now, she was a beautiful, greasy puzzle that I spent my weekends trying to solve. On this particular Saturday, the sun was bright, the air was crisp, and Led Zeppelin was whispering from my Bluetooth speaker. I was wrist-deep in the engine bay, covered in a film of grease and satisfaction, trying to coax the carburetor into something resembling a functional state. The smell of gasoline and WD-40 was my incense. This was my church. She drinks more oil than a Texas tycoon and sounds like a bear gargling gravel when she finally turns over. But she's my bear. Every tightened bolt, every cleaned spark plug felt like a conversation with my dad. He was the kind of guy who believed you could fix anything with the right wrench and enough patience. I was the kind of guy who worked in IT, telling people to turn things off and on again. Working on this car was my way of proving he was right. I was so lost in the delicate dance of adjusting the fuel-air mixture that I didn't notice the shadow fall over me. I looked up, squinting into the sun. There she was, Carol. Mid-50s, clad in a pastel pink tracksuit that looked more expensive than my entire tool collection, with a visor pulled down so tight it was probably cutting off circulation to her perfectly coiffed blonde hair. Her face was permanently locked in a "I'd like to speak to the manager" expression. She didn't say a word. She just stood at the edge of my driveway, arms crossed, and stared. She stared at the tools laid out on a greasy towel. She stared at the can of brake cleaner. She stared at the Stallion like it was a dead possum I'd dragged onto the lawn. After a full, excruciating minute of this silent judgment, she just shook her head with a little tisk and marched back to her own pristine, garage door always closed house. It was a declaration of war, and I didn't even know it yet. The first shot was fired via stationary. The next morning I found a note tucked under my windshield wiper. It was printed on pale yellow paper, in Comic Sans of all fonts, and it had been laminated. Laminated? Who does that? It read, "Dear neighbor, a gentle reminder that our community strives to maintain certain aesthetic standards. Prolonged vehicle maintenance can be unsightly and disrupt the visual harmony of our street. Thank you for your cooperation." It was signed, simply, "A concerned homeowner." I crumpled it in my fist and immediately called my best friend Dave. "I got a note," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Apparently the sight of a classic American muscle car is disrupting the visual harmony of the neighborhood." There was a pause on the other end. "Visual harmony? Did she actually use those words?" Dave asked, his voice thick with amusement. "Oh yeah, and she laminated it. Who laminates a passive-aggressive complaint note, Dave? Is she worried about it getting rained on? Is this a long-term complaint she plans to leave out for weeks?" "Dude, that's next-level Karening. You're dealing with a professional. You should frame it." I ignored the note, of course. It was my property, my garage, my car. But a week later, the escalation arrived in a crisp white envelope, delivered by a mailman who looked at me with an expression of pity. It was an official letter from the Maple Drive Homeowners Association. It cited Bylaw 17, subsection B, a vague and menacingly worded rule about prolonged vehicle repair conducted in public view. There was a photograph of my car in my driveway attached as Exhibit A, and at the bottom, a $50 fine. That evening, I laid the letter out on the kitchen table for my girlfriend, Sarah, to inspect. She was the calm, rational yin to my often impulsive yang. She read it, her brow furrowed. $50? For fixing your own car? She said, shaking her head. That's insane. Right? It's a matter of principle, I declared, pacing the kitchen. Okay, but why don't you just work on it with the garage door closed, just to keep the peace? She suggested, ever the diplomat. It's my garage, Sarah. It's not like I'm smelting ore in the driveway. Besides, the ventilation is terrible with the door closed. I'd pass out from the fumes. She can't just dictate what I do on my own property. I know, Leo, but this woman sounds like she has a lot of time on her hands. Is this really the hill you want to die on? It's a beautiful hill, I muttered, staring out the window at the stallion. And it's got a V8. The final straw came the following Saturday. I'd finally gotten the carburetor dialed in, and it was time for the moment of truth. I hopped in, turned the key, and the stallion roared to life. It wasn't a purr. It was a throaty, ground-shaking bellow that rattled the windows and probably scared the squirrels in the next zip code. I was ecstatic. It was the sound of progress. It was also apparently the sound of Carol's last nerve snapping. She marched across the street, her pink tracksuit replaced by a beige one, a color I could only describe as official complaint khaki. She stopped on the sidewalk, not daring to set foot on my property. "Excuse me?" she yelled over the engine's rumble. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. "Can I help you, Carol?" "This is completely unacceptable!" she shrieked, her voice tight with rage. "This noise is a violation of the city's noise ordinance, and the fumes. I have sensitive sinuses. Do you have any idea what you are doing to the property values of this neighborhood?" I just stared at her. Property values. That was her god. "I'm just trying to get a classic car running," I said calmly. "That is not a car. It is a public nuisance. It's an eyesore. I have reported you to the HOA, and my next call will be to the city. Consider this your final warning." She spun on her heel and marched back to her beige castle, leaving me sitting in a cloud of exhaust fumes and righteous indignation. That night, defeated and fuming, I sat in my home office with a six-pack of beer and a copy of the HOA bylaws I'd downloaded from their terrible Angel Fire-esque website. I was going to find something, anything, to fight back with. Page after page was filled with soul-crushing rules about lawn height, fence colors, and the approved number of decorative gnomes. 2, if you're wondering. The section on vehicles was ironclad. No commercial vehicles overnight. No RVs for more than 48 hours. And there it was, 17B, the rule she'd used against me. All major automotive repairs or restorations must be conducted within an enclosed structure, not visible from the street. I was ready to give up. I leaned back in my chair, taking a long pull from my beer. It was over. I'd have to work in the dark, suffocating garage. Carol had won. But then, my eyes drifted to a different section. Section 24, Temporary Structures and Commercial Activities. My heart started to beat a little faster. It was mostly about rules for weekend garage sales and graduation party tents, but buried in the legalese was a sentence that shone like a beacon of hope. It stated that temporary structures for the purpose of commercial enterprise were exempt from many of the residential aesthetic rules, provided the owner obtained a simple temporary business permit from the city, and the structure did not pose a public safety hazard. The rules for a resident fixing his car were draconian, but the rules for a business? They were shockingly lax. An idea started to form in my mind, a glorious, petty, and utterly unhinged idea. I started to laugh. It began as a chuckle, then grew into a full-blown maniacal cackle. I grabbed my phone and dialed Dave. "Dude," I said, trying to catch my breath, "the HOA can't stop me from working on my car if it's not a personal project." "What are you talking about?" Dave asked. "Are you going to claim it belongs to a charity for blind and deaf mechanics?" "Better," I said, a grin spreading across my face. "I'm going to open a business. A very, very exclusive business." "Okay. I'm opening a dealership." There was a long, dead silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the gears turning in his head. Then a slow, appreciative whistle. "Leo," he said, his voice filled with a reverence I'd never heard before. "You are the pettiest man I have ever known. I'm so proud." The plan, which we immediately codenamed Operation Big Top, consumed us. The next morning, Dave came over with a laptop and a determined glint in his eye. We weren't just going to get a tent. We were going to get the most ostentatious, most corporate, most ridiculously oversized tent that my credit card could handle. We scrolled through websites for party and event suppliers, our search history becoming a bizarre collage of wedding canopies, circus tents, and commercial shelters. "What about this one?" Dave said, pointing to a modest 10x20 pop-up. "It's tasteful, beige, it'll blend in." "Blend in?" I scoffed, scrolling past it. "Dave, blending in is how we got into this mess. We're not aiming for tasteful. We're aiming for flagrant. We need something that says corporate synergy, and I'm better than you. It needs to be an affront to everything Carol holds dear." My eyes landed on it. The Prestige Series 20x40 Commercial Event Pavilion. It was a majestic beast of vinyl and aluminum, stark white, with optional windowed walls and a frame that looked like it could withstand a hurricane. The product photos showed it filled with round tables draped in linen for a fancy outdoor wedding. Another photo showed a new car gleaming under its canopy at a promotional event. It was perfect. "That's the one," I said, a sense of awe in my voice. "Leo, that thing costs more than the car is probably worth right now," Dave said, his eyes wide. "The reviews are from people who run farmers markets and catering companies." "Exactly. It's a legitimate business expense," I said, clicking add to cart. And think of the look on her face. That was all the convincing he needed. 3 days later, a freight truck that looked way too big for our quiet suburban street wheezed to a stop in front of my house. The driver, a burly man named Sal with a world-weary sigh permanently etched on his face, lowered a massive wooden pallet onto the asphalt at the end of my driveway. It was the size of a king-sized bed and weighed nearly 700 pounds. He handed me the clipboard to sign, looked at the pallet, looked at my standard 2-car garage, looked back at the pallet, and just shook his head. "Good luck, pal," he grunted. And with that, he heaved himself back into his truck and rumbled away, leaving me alone with my glorious, terrible purchase. The arrival of the pallet did not go unnoticed. Curtains twitched. A neighbor who was power washing his driveway suddenly found a reason to power wash the same square foot of concrete for 15 straight minutes, his gaze fixed on the monstrosity. Carol's front door opened a crack and then snapped shut. The air was thick with unspoken questions and suburban judgment. The tent, even in its box, was already disrupting the visual harmony. The instruction manual was thicker than a phone book, and written in what I assume was a pidgin translation from a language not of this earth. It featured diagrams of smiling, racially diverse stick figures easily assembling the tent, a feat that, after an hour of trying to just identify the different lengths of aluminum poles, I deemed to be an outright lie. Dave and I managed to unpack about a third of it before we were tangled in vinyl sheets and covered in sweat. "We need help," Dave panted, kicking at a pile of inscrutable metal connectors. "We need a professional, or a team of Amish barn raisers." He was right. This was not a two-man job. This was an act of industrial construction. A quick search for local event tent assembly led me to a company called Barry's Big Tents and Party Supplies. The website looked like it was designed in 1998, but the reviews were solid. I called, and a gravelly voice answered on the first ring. "Barry's?" "Hi, I need a quote on a tent assembly," I said. "What size?" 20 by 40. There was a low whistle. "That's a big boy. What's the occasion? Wedding? Bar mitzvah?" It's a pop-up business venture," I stammered. A pause. "Right. Driveway or backyard?" "Driveway." Another, longer pause. "I'm gonna have to see this. Be there in an hour." Barry rolled up in a beat-up Ford F-250 with his company logo peeling off the side. He was a short, stocky man with a wiry red beard, a faded baseball cap, and the fast-talking energy of a carnival barker. He got out, took one look at the pallet, another at my house, and then stared at me with a skeptical squint. "All right, so let me get this straight," he said, gesturing at the pallet with a thumb. "You want me and my guys to erect a full-blown revival meeting tent in your driveway. Not for a party, not for a wedding." "Correct," I said, trying to sound as businesslike as possible. "It's for a pop-up business venture." Barry's eyes narrowed. "A business venture." He glanced past me into the garage, his eyes landing on the stallion. "What are you selling?" I took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. I had to sell the lie. With a completely straight face, I said exclusivity, and this one, single, not currently running 1969 Mustang. Barry stared at me. The silence stretched. I was sure he was going to laugh in my face and leave. Instead, a slow, magnificent grin spread across his face, revealing a gold tooth. "The HOA," he said. More of a statement than a question. I just nodded. "The lady in the pink tracksuit across the street?" he asked. "That's the one." He slapped his knee and let out a huge laugh. "My man, I have been waiting for a job like this my whole life. My cousin lives 2 streets over, and that woman tried to fine him because his garden hose wasn't coiled in a counterclockwise direction. Consider this a public service, and a pain-in-the-ass tax for her. We'll have this sucker up by lunch tomorrow." The next morning, Barry's crew descended. It was a spectacle. Their truck was loud, their music was louder, and they worked with a noisy efficiency that was the polar opposite of the neighborhood's usual quiet hum. Drills whirred, rubber mallets thudded against stakes, aluminum poles clanged together. It was a symphony of glorious, productive chaos. I watched the whole thing from my living room window, sipping my coffee like a king overseeing the construction of his castle. As predicted, Carol came out of her house, her face a perfect mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She held up her phone, filming the entire process while narrating into it, presumably for her lawyers or a future true crime documentary. By noon, it was done. The tent was up. And it was magnificent. It was so much bigger than I had imagined. It filled my entire 2-car driveway, its stark white peak soaring nearly to the height of my first-floor windows. It completely dominated the front of my house, casting a long, imposing shadow that stretched all the way across the street, directly onto Carol's prize-winning rose bushes. It was a pristine, commercial, utterly out-of-place monument to spite. I walked outside and stood before it, a feeling of, what have I done? Warring with a giddy, uncontrollable joy. Barry clapped me on the shoulder. "There you go, pal," he said, beaming. "Looks legit, don't it? Now you just need some sad-looking plastic plants and you're in business." He was right. The war was on, but my fortress was finally built. With the massive white tent occupying my driveway like an occupying army, the next phase of Operation Big Top was branding. A fortress is nothing without a flag. That evening, Dave came over armed with cheap beer and his laptop, ready to serve as my pro bono director of marketing. "All right, what are we calling this establishment?" he asked, cracking open a can. I was thinking something simple. "Leo's Car Place," I said. Dave winced. "No, that sounds like a front for a chop shop. We need something with class, something that sounds exclusive and completely ridiculous." We spent the next hour brainstorming. Mustang Meadows, the Ford Fortress, Suburban Autodreams. They were all terrible. Then, looking at the car's aggressive posture under the garage lights, it hit me. "The Stallion Station," I said. Dave's eyes lit up. "The Stallion Station! Yes, it's perfect! It sounds like a gas station for mythological creatures. I love it!" He quickly designed a logo, a simple, silhouetted profile of a Mustang, and we found a local print shop that did rush jobs on vinyl banners. The next line of text was my idea. An exclusive automotive experience. "We have to add a tagline," Dave insisted. He typed for a moment and then turned the laptop to me. Underneath, in a smaller, more serious font, it read, "By appointment only, seriously." The next morning I picked up the banner. It was glorious. We spent 20 minutes with a ladder and a fistful of zip ties, stretching it across the front of the tent. It was the final, perfect touch. My driveway no longer looked like it was hosting a wedding. It looked like it was hosting a regional sales event for a mid-level corporation. Of course, a business needs staff. "I can't believe I'm doing this," Dave muttered as he adjusted the collar of the polyester blazer I'd bought him at a thrift store. It was a nauseating shade of mustard yellow and at least 2 sizes too small, pulling tightly across his shoulders. "You look like a professional, my friend," I said, trying not to laugh. "You are now the official sales manager of the Stallion Station." "What do I even do?" he asked, looking lost. "You just stand there and look official. Maybe carry a clipboard. If anyone asks, you tell them our single inventory item is a limited edition classic with significant investment potential." To complete the scene, we dragged a rickety card table, 2 folding chairs, and a sad-looking potted fern I'd forgotten to water for a month into the tent. We pushed the Stallion out of the garage and positioned it perfectly in the center, polishing its dusty hood until it gleamed. The effect was sublime, a perfect intersection of pathetic and professional. The banner was the final straw for Carol. I swear she must have a direct line to the police dispatch with me on speed dial. Not 10 minutes after we'd fastened the last zip tie, a police cruiser rolled slowly down Maple Drive, its presence as out of place as my tent. It parked directly in front of my house. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The joke was over. I was about to get a very real, very expensive ticket and an order to dismantle my masterpiece. "Showtime," I whispered to Dave, and walked out to meet them. 2 officers got out. The driver was older, with graying hair, and a deeply weary face that suggested he had seen every form of human stupidity, and was profoundly tired of all of it. His name tag, Red Miller. The other officer was younger, probably fresh out of the academy, with a bright face that was desperately trying, and spectacularly failing, to maintain a serious expression. His name tag read Jenkins. I met them at the entrance to my dealership, adopting a calm, welcoming posture, as if I'd been expecting them. "Good morning, officers. Welcome to the Stallion Station. How can I help you today?" Officer Miller fixed me with a flat, unimpressed stare. "Son, we got a call about… well, I'm not even sure what to call this." He gestured vaguely at the tent. "Your neighbor seems to think you've started a cult." "No cult, officer," I said with a pleasant smile. "Just a small business. We specialize in vintage automotive curation." Behind Miller, Officer Jenkins coughed, a sound that was suspiciously close to a snort of laughter. He turned away, pretending to examine a bush. "Curation, right?" he muttered. "She says you're running an illegal repair shop in your driveway," Miller continued, his voice a monotone drone. "Absolutely not," I replied, my confidence swelling. This was the moment I had prepared for. "As you can see, this is a sales floor. Per City Ordinance 74B, subsection C, this is a temporary commercial structure for which I have obtained the proper permit. We are simply showcasing our single, exclusive inventory item for potential clients." I reached into my back pocket and produced a crisp, folded piece of paper. It was my temporary business permit from the city, which I had applied for online the night I hatched the plan. It cost me $35. I handed it to Miller. He took it, his eyebrows raising slightly as he unfolded it. He read it over, then read it again. He looked from the paper to the tent, then to the banner, then back to the paper. A long, weary sigh escaped his lips. "You got a business license for this curation business?" he asked, the word curation tasting like ash in his mouth. "Filed the LLC paperwork online this morning with the state," I said proudly. "The Stallion Station LLC is pending, but I have the receipt of filing." Miller looked across the street. Carol was standing on her porch, arms crossed, with a triumphant smirk that was slowly dissolving into a mask of confused fury as she watched the interaction unfold. He looked at me, then at Jenkins, who was now biting his lip to keep from laughing. "All right," Miller said, handing the permit back to me. "Let's just take a look." He and Jenkins walked into the tent. Miller's face remained a stony mask of professionalism. He walked a slow circle around the stallion, peered at the sad fern on the card table, and then gave Dave a long, searching look. Dave, for his part, stood ramrod straight in his terrible blazer, holding his clipboard like it was a sacred text. "Everything in order here, son?" Miller asked him. "Yes, sir, officer," Dave squeaked. "Just managing leads." Jenkins had abandoned all pretense of inspection and was now examining the far corner of the tent with intense interest, his shoulders shaking. Miller walked back out into the sunlight and faced me. "All right, kid. You've done your homework. You're not breaking any laws that I can see right now." He paused, pinching the bridge of his nose. "But son, you are breaking my spirit. You are creating a mountain of paperwork for me. Try to keep the curation quiet, you understand." "Crystal clear, officer," I said. "We operate by appointment only, so it will be very discreet." He just shook his head, a gesture of pure defeat. He turned to go, then stopped and looked back at me. "Just out of curiosity, how much for the car?" "Price available upon consultation," I said with a wink. He didn't smile. He just sighed again, got in his car, and drove away, with Jenkins visibly laughing in the passenger seat. The moment the cruiser turned the corner, Dave and I erupted. We jumped up and down, high-fiving like we'd just won the Super Bowl. Sarah came out the front door, shaking her head but unable to hide a grin. "I cannot believe that actually worked," she said, looking at the tent with a new sense of respect. "Never doubt the power of malicious compliance and a well-placed fern," I said, throwing an arm around her. The victory was sweet, but across the street, the war was just heating up. Carol stood on her porch, phone pressed to her ear, her expression one of cold fury. She had lost the battle of the HOA and the local police, but I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't retreating. She was reloading. She was going over their heads. I looked at the giant white tent, the ridiculous banner, and the beautiful, problematic car at the center of it all. This had started as a joke, a petty act of revenge. But now, it was something more. It was a full-time job of being a professional nuisance, and I had a feeling my biggest challenges were yet to come. I patted the Mustang's fender. "You better be worth it, you beautiful piece of junk," I whispered. The police visit transformed the Stallion station from a private dispute into a public spectacle. The fuse was lit by a 16-year-old kid down the street named Kevin, who apparently fancied himself the next Martin Scorsese of TikTok. He filmed a 30-second video of my setup from across the street. A slow pan of the massive tent, a zoom-in on the by appointment only banner, another zoom on Carol glaring from her window, all set to the goofy, upbeat circus theme song. He titled it, "My neighbor is fighting his HOA with a fake car dealership, and I'm here for it. #Karen, #HOA, #malicious compliance." By evening, it had 1,000 views. Then someone shared it to the Maple Drive Community Forum on Facebook, and all hell broke loose. The comments section became a digital civil war. Half the neighborhood was firmly on Team Carol. "This is an absolute disgrace," wrote a woman named Brenda. "What is this neighborhood coming to? My kids have to see this monstrosity every day on their way to school. It's lowering all of our property values." "I agree, Brenda," another chimed in. "He should be fined into oblivion. The HOA needs to grow a spine and shut this circus down." But then, the other half emerged. My people. The silent majority who had apparently been living in fear of Carol and her laminated notes for years. "Are you kidding me? This guy is a legend," wrote a man I recognized from a few houses down. "That HOA has been on a power trip for years. I got a warning because my trash can was visible from the street for 3 hours after pickup. Go get him, Stallion Man." "My hero," another comment read. "He found a loophole and is using it to fight the system. This is the most American thing I've ever seen. #Stallion Station." Dave, who had appointed himself my public relations and social media manager, was tracking the engagement with glee. "Dude, we're trending," he said, showing me his phone, as we sat inside the tent that night. In a town of 15,000 people. But still, the hashtag is catching on. Someone in the comments called you the malicious compliance king. "Put that on the banner," I said, only half joking. The digital fame began to bleed into the real world. People started driving by my house slowly, their cell phones held up. One afternoon, a minivan pulled over and a guy leaned out. "Hey, are you the dealership guy?" he yelled. "That's me," I said. "Awesome, man, stick it to the man," he shouted, giving me a thumbs up before driving off. Another time, a woman walking her dog actually stopped at the entrance of the tent. "So, can I make an appointment?" she asked, a twinkle in her eye. "Certainly," Dave said, stepping forward in his mustard blazer and clicking his pen against his clipboard. "Our next available consultation is Tuesday at 4. She laughed and said she'd check her calendar. My newfound local fame was intoxicating. It was also pouring gasoline on Carol's fire. I knew she was plotting, mobilizing her forces. I couldn't just sit back and wait for her next move. I had to escalate. I had to lean into the absurdity. I had to make the Stallion Station so popular, so beloved by the community, that shutting it down would make the HOA look like villains. "Dave," I said, a mad gleam in my eye, "we're hosting a grand opening." The plan was simple and brilliant. We weren't just a dealership. We were a community hub. We printed up cheap, brightly colored flyers at a local copy shop. "Grand opening sales event!" they screamed in a bold font. "Come see the Stallion, the area's most exclusive automotive experience. Free hot dogs and soda, Saturday at 2 p.m. We spent an evening plastering them on telephone poles and community bulletin boards all over the neighborhood, carefully avoiding Carol's property, of course. Saturday arrived, and it was a perfect sunny afternoon. I'd bought 100 hot dogs, a mountain of buns, and several coolers full of soda. Sarah, after calling me an agent of chaos, reluctantly agreed to be the head of catering, setting up a folding table with condiments. I fired up my grill. Dave put on his official blazer. We cranked up a playlist of classic rock on a big speaker just inside the tent. And we waited, wondering if anyone would actually show up. At 2:05 p.m., I was starting to think I'd just be eating hot dogs for a week. Then the first family appeared, a young couple with their 2 kids, looking curious. "Is this the place from Facebook?" the dad asked. "It is indeed. Welcome to the Stallion Station grand opening. Grab a hot dog," I said with my best salesman smile. And then they kept coming. It was like a dam had broken. People I'd only ever waved to before were walking up my driveway, laughing and shaking their heads. Neighbors brought neighbors. Barry, the contractor who put up the tent, showed up with his entire family, treating it like a company picnic. Soon, my driveway and front lawn were filled with 30, then 40 people. They were eating, drinking soda, and mingling. Kids were drawing on the asphalt with chalk. It had turned into a full-blown impromptu block party. The centerpiece of it all, gleaming under the white canopy, was the Stallion. People were gathered around it, admiring it, taking pictures. My dad's old car had never been so popular. Across the street, the curtains in Carol's living room were practically vibrating with rage. She came out several times, phone in hand, documenting every perceived violation. A car parked too close to a fire hydrant. A group of people technically standing on the town's grass strip. She was a furious one-woman surveillance state. Naturally, she called the cops again. I saw the cruiser pull up around 3:30 p.m., the same one as before. A collective groan went through the crowd. This time, only Officer Miller got out. He walked toward the party with the slow, plodding gait of a man walking to his own execution. He looked even more tired than the last time. "Leo!" he called out, stopping at the edge of the crowd. He didn't even try to get through. "We're getting calls about a massive, unlicensed public gathering." I grabbed a hot dog from the grill, put it in a bun, and walked over to him, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. "Not a party, officer," I said cheerfully, holding out the hot dog as a peace offering. "It's a catered sales event, open to the public, fully compliant with my temporary business permit. We're generating leads. Care for a hot dog? We have relish." Miller stared at the hot dog. He stared at me. He looked at the crowd of smiling, sauce-covered faces. He looked up at the sky as if asking for divine intervention. It didn't come. He let out a sigh so profound it seemed to suck all the energy out of him. "Just keep the music down after 10, he said, his voice a gravelly whisper of defeat. He turned, got back in his car, and drove away. The entire party erupted in a massive cheer. They weren't just cheering for me. They were cheering for the hot dogs, for the beautiful day, for the simple, joyful act of defying a neighborhood tyrant. I raised the hot dog in the air like a trophy. At that moment, standing in my driveway surrounded by my neighbors, I wasn't just the malicious compliance king. I was the king of Maple Drive. The grand opening party was my peak. It was a glorious, hot dog-fueled victory. But it was also, as I would soon find out, the act that pushed Carol to summon the final boss of bureaucracy. She had failed with the HOA. She had failed with the local police. So she had spent her entire weekend navigating the labyrinthine phone system of City Hall until she found someone with a title long enough and a disposition sour enough to take her seriously. On Monday morning, as I was enjoying a quiet cup of coffee inside the tent and admiring my handiwork, a sensible gray sedan parked at my curb. Out stepped a man in a wrinkled gray suit carrying a thick, three-ring binder like a shield. He had thinning hair, glasses perched on the end of his nose, and an expression that suggested he had never experienced the emotion of joy. Behind him, like a triumphant vizier, was Carol. Her smirk was back, more potent than ever. She had brought in the big guns. "Mr. Leo Maxwell?" the man in the suit asked, his voice dry and crackly, like old paper. "That's me," I said, stepping out of the tent. "I am Arthur Henderson, from the City Zoning and Code Enforcement Office," he announced, brandishing his binder. "I've received a number of extensive complaints regarding this structure and the commercial activity being conducted on this residentially zoned lot. This was it, the final showdown. Dave wasn't here. Sarah was at work. It was just me against Henderson and his binder of doom, with Carol providing evil moral support from the sidewalk. "Everything is in order, Mr. Henderson," I said calmly. "I have a temporary business permit, and my LLC is filed with the state." "A permit does not grant you carte blanche to violate fundamental zoning laws, Mr. Maxwell," he droned, flipping open his binder. A sea of tabs and highlighted paragraphs greeted him. For starters, City Code 3, 11.4 clearly states that any commercial signage in an R1 residential zone cannot exceed 4 square feet. Your banner appears to be, by my estimation, at least 40 square feet. Checkmate. He had me. I hadn't even thought to check the rules on sign size. I could feel Carol's smug aura washing over me. But I wasn't done yet. "Ah, but you see," I countered, thinking fast, "that isn't a sign. It's a decorative banner. Art, if you will. Part of the temporary structure's aesthetic. There's no ordinance against hanging art, is there?" Henderson blinked. "That's a matter of interpretation." "Isn't everything?" I smiled. He scowled and flipped a page. "Furthermore," he continued, clearly annoyed, "a temporary business structure cannot be the primary use of a residential lot for more than 14 consecutive days. You are on day 6. "I'm well aware," I said, "but the tent isn't the primary use of the lot. My house is. The tent is an accessory structure, no different than a garden shed or a gazebo, which is being used for a temporary purpose. It's all right there in the permit application." We went back and forth like this for 10 minutes. A dizzying duel of bylaws and loopholes. For every ordinance he threw at me, I had a half-baked, legally ambiguous interpretation. He was getting more and more frustrated, his face turning a blotchy red. It was a battle of attrition, and I had nothing but time. It was during our heated debate over driveway setback requirements that a new player entered the arena. A gleaming, cherry-red 1967 Corvette Stingray rumbled down the street and pulled up to the curb. The engine purred with a low, confident growl that made the stallion sound like a lawnmower. The driver's side door opened, and a man who looked to be in his mid-60s got out. He had a kind face, a thick head of silver hair, and wore a worn-in leather jacket. He completely ignored me, Henderson, and the fuming Carol. His eyes were locked on the Mustang. He walked into the tent, his footsteps slow and reverent. He didn't see a nuisance or a legal violation. He saw a 69 Mach 1. "Wow," he said, his voice soft with appreciation. He ran a hand gently over the fender. "Is this a 351 Windsor?" The question was so normal, so blessedly free of legal jargon, that it jolted me out of my battle mode. "It is," I said, walking over to him. "Matching numbers. My dad bought it new." "Incredible," the man said. "I saw a picture of this setup on the town Facebook page. Thought it was a joke, but I had to come see the car." We started talking. His name was Gary, and he was a retired mechanic who spent his days restoring classic cars. He knew everything about the Stallion without me having to tell him. He pointed out the original distributor cap, commented on the factory-correct paint code, and knew exactly why the engine was probably running rich. It was like talking to a car whisperer. For the first time in weeks, I was having a conversation about the car itself, not the chaos surrounding it. It felt good. Mr. Henderson and Carol stood off to the side, forgotten. The zoning war had been put on hold. Gary walked a full circle around the car, nodding to himself. "My first car was a '69, he said wistfully. "Not a Mach 1, just a coupe. Had to sell it when my first kid was born. Biggest regret of my life." He looked at me, a serious expression on his face. "You planning on selling this one?" "Everything's for sale for the right price, I guess," I said, quoting a line I'd heard in a movie once. I didn't actually mean it. Gary nodded again. He looked the car over one last time, did some quick math in his head, and then looked me square in the eye. "I know what you've got here," he said. "I know what it needs. I know what it's worth. I'll give you $50,000 cash. I'll have it flat-bedded out of here this afternoon." The world stopped. $50,000. The sound of birds chirping seemed to get louder. The sun felt warmer. I looked at the car, my dad's car, the source of all my stress and all my joy. I looked at Mr. Henderson, who was now just staring, his binder hanging uselessly at his side. I looked at Carol, whose jaw had dropped so far she could have caught flies. Her carefully constructed world of bylaws and property values had just been torpedoed by the one thing she truly understood: a big pile of money. Dave, who had just pulled up on his bike to bring me a coffee and witness the showdown, had overheard the offer. He rushed to my side. "Say yes," he hissed in my ear. "Say yes before he sobers up or his wife finds out." I looked at Gary. He wasn't joking. He was a man who knew what he wanted. Selling the car felt like letting go of a piece of my dad. But then I thought about what my dad would say. He'd probably laugh, call me a genius, and tell me to take the money and run. I stuck out my hand. "Gary, you've got a deal." We shook on it. The sale was done. The entire inventory of the Stallion Station, LLC, had been sold in a single transaction. I turned to the stunned bureaucrat and the apoplectic neighbor. "Well, Mr. Henderson," I said with a broad, triumphant smile, "it appears my business here is concluded. The Stallion Station will be liquidating all corporate assets and dissolving, effective immediately. The temporary structure will be removed well within the 14-day limit." Henderson just stared, utterly dumbfounded. He had come prepared for a fight about zoning, and instead had witnessed a major financial transaction. He mumbled something about filing the appropriate paperwork, snapped his binder shut, and retreated to his sedan. A broken man. Carol stood frozen on the sidewalk for another minute, her brain seemingly unable to process this outcome. She hadn't won. I hadn't won. A third party had just walked onto the battlefield and bought the entire war. Without a word, she turned and walked back into her house. The next day, Barry's crew came and dismantled the tent in under an hour. My driveway was suddenly empty, quiet, and blindingly normal. That afternoon, a flatbed truck arrived, and Gary, true to his word, carefully winched the Stallion up onto the back. As it was being strapped down, I saw Carol watering her rose bushes. She looked up, and our eyes met across the street. There was no smile, no apology, no sign of friendship. But there was a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It was a truce, born not of understanding, but of mutual exhaustion. That evening, I sat on my front porch with Sarah and Dave, holding a cashier's check that felt ridiculously heavy in my hand. The street was peaceful. The silence was the good kind again. "So," Sarah said, leaning her head on my shoulder, "what are you going to do with all that money?" I took a long sip of my beer, a wicked grin spreading across my face. First, I'm buying a new project car. Something small. Maybe a Triumph Spitfire. Dave groaned. And second, I continued, looking over at Carol's perfectly manicured lawn, I'm getting quotes for a new, soundproof, fully permitted two-car garage with its own state-of-the-art ventilation system. I hear Barry does great work. Some people fight the system. I just made it so inconvenient and absurd that the system, or at least a nice man with a fat wallet who found me because of the system, paid me to go away. And honestly, that's the most American dream I can think of.